Hello, my name is Anna Whaler. I am a student at Grand Valley completing Math 496. I am so excited to introduce this game to you today. G.L.A.S Advanced Version is a two-player game that explores considering equalities such as greater than, less than, and it explores place value with up to 5-digit numbers. This is a variation of G.L.A.S created by Janissa Henry. The video notes are linked. The only materials needed for this game is a deck of cards. The equalities paper is optional. The cards used in this game are aces, 2 through 10, and queens. Cards that are not used are jacks, kings, and jokers, so those can be taken out right away. 2 through 10 represent their value. Aces are used as ones, and queens are used as surprise cards. The goal of this advanced G.L.A.S version is to win each hand by successfully having either the least or greatest sum of the chosen amount of digits. Let me show you how to play. The first step is taking out the jacks and the kings and any jokers you may have. After the deck has been split in half between the two players, place the equalities paper on the oldest player's side. This means they call the equality first. Cards in a stack and draw the top 4 cards from your own deck. Have the oldest person lead the first hand, then rotate who calls first for the rest of the game. There are 2 decisions in each hand. Each player will make one, taking turns on who goes first. The first person to call will choose the inequality sign. After the first call is made, the other player will call the desired length of the number 1 digit through 4 digits. All other rules still apply as far as card values, though 10s do represent 2 digits. Players then pick their cards that they believe will win the round for greater or less than the other player's number, either a 1, 2, 3, or 4 digit number. The player that wins the round will collect all the cards, and then players will draw again and rotate between calling out. Here is an example. Here is an example round. You see that player 1 has cards 3, 5, 6, and 9. And player 2 has cards ace, 2, 7, and 8. The oldest player, which is me, player 1, calls the inequalities. I will call greater than. The other player then calls the digits 1 through 4. Player 2 calls 4. We can then rearrange our cards so that we try and get the bigger number, so I will rearrange my cards. I'm going to make 9,653. In this case, we are using all 4 cards, and we are aiming for the biggest number. And Evan is going to rearrange his cards to make 8,721. You then flip your cards over. This signals you are ready to show the other player what you made. And then you see that I win that round because my 4-digit number was bigger than player 2's. After each round, players will draw back up to 4 cards. This means that players should have 4 cards in their hands at all times. For example, if there is a round where 2 digits is called, after your 2 cards are played, then players must grab 2 more cards to keep their hand at 4 cards. Let's talk about if you should choose greater or less than, or how you decide how many digits when it's your turn. There's a few strategies to think about. For example, if you have the cards 3, 5, 2, 4, and it is your turn to choose greater or less than, you might want to pick less than because there are several low numbers. If you look at this hand, ace, 9, queen, and 8, it might be a toss-up as if you should choose greater or less than. The ace gives you a big advantage for less than, but if the other player picks 4 digits, it might be risky. When it is your turn to choose the number of digits, you might want to aim for the amount that you have more or less of. If you look at this hand, 7, 5, 4, 3, you might want to choose 2 digits and make either 75 or 34 if greater than or less than is called. Once announced, the player with either the greater sum or least sum wins that hand depending on the equality called. The winner of the hand collects all of the played cards and sets them in a separate pile. Players will redraw to fill their hand. Players must always have 4 cards in their hand. The game continues until all 22 cards have been used. If one player has any extra cards and the other is out, the game ends and the player keeps their cards. The player with the most cards at the end of the game wins. One special case is when a queen is drawn. This means that this is a surprise card. In this case, player 2 has drawn a queen and is deciding to use it. We call the equality sign and the number of digits. Less than and 2 was called. So then they can choose to use the queen or not. In this case, player 2 is using the queen. We then show our hand. Then player 2 draws a card from the top of their deck and places it on top of the queen. Okay, in that case, player 1 wins that round because it was 12 versus 16. The other special case is when a 10 is drawn. This is the only card that represents a 2-digit value. Player 1 calls 1 this time, so then they can play their 10 even though it's a 2-digit number. I would win. In the event of a tie, just like in the game War, more cards are put on top of the already played cards. For example, if both players played 9, they would each draw 1 more card to put on top. The highest or lowest number would win the round, in this case greater than wins. As you can see, at the end of that game, player 1 could only fill their hand up to 3 cards. The game continues until one player cannot hold 4 cards in their hand, therefore those extra cards get thrown out. When this happens, the game ends and the players count up the number of cards in their pile. The player with the most cards wins the game. The math that is focused on in this game is place value in digits and understanding greater or less than inequalities. In the original version, players must use 2 of their 4 cards to combine using the called operation, add or subtract, greater, less than, add, subtract. Keep in mind the called equality sign when choosing the cards. On the count of 3, players will reveal their 2 cards and players will announce their sum. Sums must be correctly announced. Once announced, the players with either the greater sum or least sum win that hand depending on the equality called. The winner of the hand collects all of the played cards and sets them in a separate pile. Players will redraw to refill their hand. Players must always have 4 cards in their hand. The player with the most captured cards at the end of the game wins. This is how you play the original version of G.L.A.S.'s game. Overall, G.L.A.S is an excellent game to play and has so many variants. This is just one other version, but there are so many others that can be created, such as solely using multiplication or making fractions. This game has so many possibilities, that's why it's amazing.